Hi and welcome to Let's Create Mini Polaroid Paintings. I'm Brianna and I'm going to help you today in making these mini Polaroids. So if you want to pause your screen here to see what you need, go ahead and do that. So we're going to start off with watercolor paper and you're going to measure out 4x4 square shapes on that paper and cut those into those shapes. Now what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and measure about the third tick on your inches line, or an eighth of an inch, and you're going to measure out a rectangular shape at the top portion of your square. So as you can see, I have a little mini ruler. You can use whichever ruler you like, and I'm just marking the area that I want my line to stop, and that's going to help me make that rectangle shape, and I can go from there. So as you can see, I'm messing up a few times, which is totally fine. And you can make your rectangle shape as long or as short as you like. I kind of go about a fourth of a way or about a third of the way down from the square. So it gives me more room to paint and add more objects in my rectangle shape. But you could definitely make it wider, thinner, things like that. So I'm already done getting the measurements done, and I go in and I get some painter's tape and I start bordering off the edges of the border. Now the reason why I do this is because when I put down my watercolor paint, it's not going to bleed into the or bleed past the border, and it'll be nice and clean, and it'll look like an actual Polaroid painting when you finish painting and take off that tape. So as of right now, I am lightly drawing my object, and so I have a reference photo. As you can see, my laptop is open, and I am just drawing out a street pole, and it's looking upward. The point of view is looking up to that street pole, and you can see all the wires and all the electrical lining that is going from it. And so of course you could definitely do the same object or subject, but you could definitely do whichever you prefer. I definitely recommend going out and taking pictures of reference photos of your own, whether it be a very mountainous landscape or a building or anything like that, a person. So it gives you a variety of subjects to choose from. I have chosen some of my own images in the past. I went to the drive-in a couple months ago and I had a great view, and I took a picture of that and then I created that into a painting, and just different things. So I definitely recommend it. And as you can see, how I'm holding the pencil, I am barely touching the surface of my paper. And the reason why I do that is because it's going to come out lighter and it's not going to look as muddy when I apply the paint. And so you can use whichever watercolor paint you prefer. This one has a variety of shapes, and I took off the top because you can actually use the little bevels in the top of the case to mix colors. And so now all I'm doing is I am going in with a light blue. That is my sky, and I'm going in very lightly. And the reason why I do that is because when I go on heavy, it's going to be harder to build from there. So you always want to put a light layer of watercolor paint down first, because then once it dries you can build up the color, and if you need a darker area then you go darker. And as you can see, now I'm going in with a darker shade and I'm going light as well. And you always want to remember that whenever you are using watercolors, when you use a lot of water, you're more likely to get more of a translucent color from whichever you choose. Now if you barely put a little bit of water on top of your watercolors, it's gonna come out thicker and you're gonna get more pigment and it's onto your brush. And so you always just want to remember that. And as you can see, I'm having a little bit of issues with my tape. My tape is a little old, so it's not as tacky. Yeah, as you can see, it's starting to come up from the bottom. And so what I decided was to move it off, and as you can see, I'm having more issues, but I'm just moving it off so that I can start a second one while that first layer dries. And so I definitely recommend, instead of just taping it to the table, unless you're just doing one, then tape it to the table and it won't move. But if you're going to do multiple, wrap that tape around the back of the picture and you won't have any issues like I did. So I'm just repeating the process again, measuring out my rectangular shape, and this time I'm like, okay, I know for sure which measurements I want to use, and then I'm going to tape off my area. Now, again, like I said, you can use whichever subject you choose. This time I had decided to choose a sea turtle. And so as you can see right here, I am going back and wrapping that tape around. As you'll see later in the video, I am having issues with my tape, but like I said, I definitely recommend using tape, whether it's painter's tape or scotch tape, to just border off your picture. It gives it a nice clean look, so I highly recommend it. As you can see, I'm getting that ready, and then I will go ahead and start lightly putting on my drawing, and I'll go from there. So now that I'm securing my tape better onto my table, I'm going to lightly start sketching out my subject, which I chose a sea turtle. And so, like, again, draw lightly so it's easier to erase and it's not going to smudge when you add your watercolor paint to your paper, because if you put it a little dark, it will start bleeding into your paint and it's going to look muddy and you're not going to like it. So again, draw lightly and always just do the contour lines or just basic lines that give you the main idea of your subject, so you're not trying to get it specifically perfect, especially if you're going to go on top with paint. Alright, so my camera died, and so I had to start on my iPhone camera, but I basically painted a layer, the first layer for my second painting, and I'm letting it dry, and now I'm going on top with a dark brown to use as my base color, which is the general color of your subject, and that is what the subject, in this case the telephone pole or the electrical pole, is. And so I'm going in with that brown, and I'm using a very thin brush, very small, and you can use whichever brush you feel that you have, if whichever brushes you have in general. You don't have to go out and buy fancy brushes. You can always go cheap and get the best quality whenever you paint. So now, like I said, I went in with that brown paint, and now I'm going in with more of a taupish color, and I'm using that for the highlights. And of course, you know, my hand is in the way, so as you can see now, I'm kind of going in there with that, and then later I will go in with a dark brown or a black to use for my shadows. And as you can see, I put it at the parts of the subject that is not going to be receiving a lot of light. So under some of the wooden poles, on the right side, because the light is coming from the left, so the right side may not be getting a lot of light, and so that's where I put those dark shades. And always keep in mind where your light source is coming from, and that will definitely help you out whenever you're putting in your shadows and highlights for your subject. Okay, so now that I've got that done for the electrical pole, I'm going in with a darker blue, and I am just filling in that skyline, and I'm just kind of randomly spreading it around those open areas, and I'm just kind of dabbling my brush. I'm not doing full strokes, I'm just kind of barely tapping the brush onto my paper, so it kind of gives it a more fluid, more just random stroke to the image, and it gives it some form of texture and some body to it. So I definitely recommend it. You know, you don't always have to do full strokes, but unless you like that, you can definitely do it. But I just do that just because it gives it also an illusion to clouds as well, and you can kind of make out the shapes for it, so it's easier whenever you go back with white and you figure out where you want your cloud shapes. And so that's what I'm just doing, and because we put that first layer down, it's a lot easier to build up. As you can see now, that blue is coming out better and more vibrant, and so I just let that dry, and I'm going to my second image, which is my turtle. Now you'll think, well, Brianna, you know, you have this blue down, and a sea turtle is more like greenish gray color, and is it not going to look ugly and a nasty color? Well, it's not, because since we did a very thin layer of watercolor paint, because the color that we're putting for the turtle, which I used a gray, a dark gray, because it's so dark, I barely put a little bit of water in there so I could get some more pigment, and it will pop from that blue. And I used a blue and a mixture of a turquoise color as well to get that oceany green color or oceany blue color. So yeah, that's why I always recommend go light for your first layer, and because if we would have went dark, it would have been a lot harder to you know, get that color to pop, or it might have made the color more muddy. And so definitely recommend that. So I'm just going in there and filling in that sea turtle, and then I will later go in with the details. So I definitely recommend whenever you're using watercolors to make sure that your paint is dry before you add any other colors to it. So for example, if I had put down a blue and I wanted to add some red or yellow to capture some kind of sunset action, I would want that blue to dry, because if I immediately put that red down and that red is going to be right on top or right next to that blue, it's going to bleed into each other and it's going to make a purple or an orange or a green or whatever color that you add next to it. So to avoid that and to avoid any freakouts, definitely make sure your paint is dry. And if you put too much paint, if you see it looks like a puddle of water on your picture, definitely get a paper towel and just lay it right on top and just pick it right up. You don't want to smear it. You don't want to pull that paper towel towards you. You just want to put it on and just dab it off, because then it'll keep that paint in its place and it won't smudge into any other areas. And so I definitely recommend that when you're using watercolors, because unlike acrylics are very forgiving, because you can let it dry and paint it right on top of it and it doesn't look like you messed up. Whereas in watercolor, you can definitely tell where you messed up. And if you rub too much of your brush onto the paper and trying to remove any of that watercolor stain or anything like that, it definitely can ruin your paper and it will start tearing it off. So you just want to be gentle with it. Be relaxed. You don't want to feel too rushed whenever you're making these paintings. So definitely take your time and just have fun with it. Okay, so as you can see, I'm going back in with a darker gray, kind of added some black to it, and I'm dabbling again, just like how I did with the sky on my first painting. I'm doing that for texture for the turtle's skin and for the shell. And so just to give that illusion of realism in there, but I still don't want to keep it super realistic. I want to keep it in the style that I like, but to create that texture and to prove that it is an actual sea turtle, I'm going to give it that texture by just using that dabbing motion onto my paper. And so again, if you want to achieve a darker pigment, just barely put a little bit of water, just a tiny bit. I just kind of run my brush in some water and then I run it into the paint, and it will make it a little bit thick and very pigmented. And then if you want more translucent, you add a lot more water, and I even recommend putting it in a different location. So either on a sheet pan or like a plate or a palette, and going and mixing that lighter translucent color on that, so it's not all sitting in one area. As you can see, my watercolor palette is set in stone. I can't move it around, and so there is a beveled top, and so I can add some water in there and then just run my brush in that paint and just run that brush in that water that I put on that top, and it'll make a more translucent color. So it's a lot easier to just layer up my paints. So as you can see, I'm adding the detail to his shell, and as you can see, he has some more geometric shapes on his shell, and so I don't know why it's escaping me, but I'm adding that to his shell to give it more realism and texture and make it believable that it is a turtle. So I always recommend looking at the finest details, because it's those small details that really give your painting or your drawing or even your sculpture, that pop of detail that it needs, and it just blows the mind away. So definitely recommend it. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go in with that turquoise color and really make that ocean floor pop at the bottom. And so on my reference photo, the ocean floor is really turquoise, and towards the top of the body of water, it's a very ocean blue, very almost a cross between a baby blue or just a royal blue. And so I'm just going in there and I'm just going in there and making sure that I get that vibrant color, because as you can see, it kind of bleeded together and it kind of is not popping for me. So I just want to make sure that you can definitely tell a difference between the sky and the ocean itself, because there's a lot of blue going on. And so that is what I'm doing, and I will go in and start adding some more blue to my first image to pop the sky. And then I'm just doing some last minute shadows to my sea turtle. Make sure that he is defined and he's having some 3D action there, making sure that he's getting some realism in there. And I'm going in with that black and also defining those shapes on his shell. And then as you can see, I am also putting it at where his fins are, to really define the texture of his skin. Now, as I am taking a pause, I'm just going to show you a close-up of what it's looking like right now at this stage. As you can see, I'm getting somewhere. You can definitely tell the shadows on the electrical line, and then you can see that my turtle is getting somewhere. There's definitely some areas that I need to fix, especially on a shell, so I will go back and do that as well. And always take your time to look and step away from your work and get an idea of what you need to fix. But this is triple gloss or triple thick gloss glaze, and this is what you'll use at the final stage of your painting. So as you can see, the painting looks very matte and we want it glossy. And you can either use a regular pin or some micron pins or any kind of pin that you like to define your image. And I like to go in there to kind of emphasize some details in my image, especially the electrical lines for the first, and then the basic shape and some details of the ocean with the second as well. So now I'm going in with the size 3 micron pen. It's a small tip, but it is big for small details. And the Jelly Roll white pen for some very stark white highlights that I want to have pop. And so, and I like to use a handkerchief, and I wash it all the time, but what I'm doing is I'm laying it on top of my image to make sure that it's not wet, there's no damp spots, so that when I run my pen over it, I get a nice clean run of the ink, and I'm not ruining the pen itself, and I'm not gonna get a bleed from the pen hitting any water. And so I'm just going in and I'm adding some electrical lines on my first picture. And like I said, the tip is a decent size between a thick and a small tip, and so you'll definitely get a nice fluid line from it and definitely get some emphasis on your subject that you're painting or drawing. So I use this one a lot, or it's the number 2. If I want a thicker line, I'll go heavier in tip, which will be either a 5 or an 8. If I want super fine, I'll go with the 0.002. And so as you can see, we're getting an image, it's looking fantastic, and I will do that and add some details to the turtle. So now that I'm done with my micron pen for that picture, I'm going to go with my Jelly Roll white gel pen, and I'm going to find those very stark areas that I want super white so it shows the highlights of the sun that's hitting the object and make the image pop. Now you don't have to use a white, you could definitely use the lightest shade of your color. So in this instance, since it is brown, I can go with a very light brown and still achieve the same look that I'm looking for. But since I have my jelly roll pen, I'm going to go ahead and use that. So, and you don't have to use jelly roll, you can use any kind of white pen that you have. I know Sharpie has a white pen as well as some other brands and that are out there. So definitely do some research and test them out and get a feel of what you like. So I'm just going in there and just creating those details, and I will add that to my turtle too. So that will be later in the video. So yeah, continue watching. So once I'm finished with my gel pen, as you can see, I'm doing those last final touches on my turtle, especially adding some highlight to the tip of his face, parts that are coming to the surface from the water and at the bottom of the ocean floor to kind of show some depth within the picture itself, and some final sketches with my micron pen on both the images, making sure that I hit everything before I put on that glaze, because once I put that glaze on, you can't go back. And so I'm just making sure that those details are done. And now I'm going to go in with that last layer of that vibrant aquamarine or aqua color that I have, and that ocean blue color as well. And I'm adding that to the ocean floor and the surface of the ocean to create that separation. And as you can see, I'm adding it right there, and I lay it on thick at this point. I don't go light, I just plaque it on, and no regrets at this point. And as you can see, I'm achieving the color and separation that I want, so then it really pops from the sky, because the sky is already blue as it is, and so we want to show that separation. And of course, I didn't add any bubbles. As you know, when you're in the water, you do create some form of bubbles in the water, and so you could definitely go and add that if you decide to do something oceanic or anything like that. And I'm going in as well on the sky on my first picture to re-emphasize the contour shapes of those clouds and um, really make that sky pop against um, that electrical pole. Now, say you put too much of that color that you put down, like if you put on a dark blue, as you can see, I put a little bit too much, so I got a hanky or a paper towel and I just dabbed it off. And or you could even use your brush and kind of spread it out and add some water, and it will definitely loosen up that pigment that you put down. Okay, so now that I've achieved what I'm liking for my image, I'm going to go ahead and take that tape off. And as you can see, I did have a little bit of bleed through just because I was having issues with my tape. It wasn't sticking because it was an older piece of tape. But I did achieve that border that I was wanting. And so that means it is time for it to dry. And as you can see, there's a close-up of my image. And it's looking fantastic, and I'm just loving how it's turning out. I love the electrical pole, and you know, as well as the sea turtle. Isn't he just cute? I just love it. So now I'm going in with that triple thick gloss glaze, and I'm going to use a very flat brush, and that is called a mop brush. And what I'm going to do is just going to put a generous amount of that glaze on top of the surface of the painting and just spread it to each corner of it. So you can see I put a little bit too much, so I just kind of transferred it over to the other side of my painting. And so I just make sure that it is getting a nice even spread of that glaze, and there's no lumps and no puddles on that image. And so once you do that, then you're done, and you'll just put that aside and you'll just let it dry. Now immediately, as you can see, I go ahead and just rinse out my brush, because if you forget to rinse off your brush, whether you put it down and you step aside for a second, you might forget that it's there. It will harden and it will ruin your brush, and there's no going back. So definitely do that. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. This is a fun project to just do with friends, family, or on your own at the park or at home. I definitely recommend it, and who doesn't love Polaroid? So again, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time. So